to the right honourable gentleman for giving way, and I find myself agreeing with everything he's said, with perhaps the exception with what he's just said.
I found myself looking at the member of the Green Party.
But would he agree that if a product is potentially dangerous, it's better to purchase it in a regulated market with controls rather than purchase it from a criminal?
That is absolutely right. And it's most likely to be unhealthy if it's illegally obtained and probably impure, perhaps even more so, of course, of hard drugs, and likely, therefore, to cause side effects which are not necessarily caused directly by the cocaine itself. And obviously, the cannabis itself, and obviously it's usually used in association with tobacco, which is itself undoubtedly harmful. Of course.
Do you recall that the chairman of the Advisory Council on Drugs made an assessment, Dr. Nutt, that, and I'll give you the quote of what he said to try to put it in perspective, that you need to stop 5,000 people taking cannabis to stop one possible case of psychosis. While 1 in 5,000 is a tiny amount, it's not a matter that one could ignore altogether, but it's certainly not one that should be exaggerated either.
Yes, I think the honourable member puts it actually into perspective with that remark. And of course, there's very little evidence, there's certain evidence that cannabis may precipitate psychosis in those prone to it anyway, and they should certainly be discouraged from using it, as I would discourage everybody from using it. But it's better that it be available and regulated than illegally supplied, but readily available in any case, and with a high level of usage in this country. The other argument that people invoke, make a little progress, is that, cannabis nowadays is different from what it was in your youth, Mr. Lilly. Well, since I didn't take it in my youth, that doesn't really make a great deal of difference. They say it's now available in much stronger and more potent forms. Of course, that's partly a symptom of illegality, just as in Prohibition times, people moved from beer to spirits because the more concentrated, the easier it was to transport and supply and escape the authorities. But I give way to the honourable member.
I'm grateful to the honourable gentleman. Would he accept, I know his argument, and my honourable friend's argument, is that whether it's for medical purposes or for general recreational use, the law should be, that cannabis should be decriminalised. But will he accept that, I think as my honourable friend does, that he might make more progress with the argument if the argument for the time being was concentrated on whether there was any product that could be developed that would have the right efficacy to justify it in medical terms, rather than the general decriminalisation, which I think is more problematic.
Well, I certainly agree that the medical arguments are overwhelming. I can't think of any good reasons for not allowing its medical use and the use of derivatives from it for medical purposes, where there clearly are arguments which I don't find compelling for prohibiting it generally. But actually, the more I examine the arguments for prohibition, the more clear it is to me that though the pretense is that it's for health reasons, the actual reason is for moral disapprobation of drugs. Now, actually, I'm probably one of the few people in this room that's prepared to say I share that. Of course, the greatest sin you can commit in this country is to take a moral view on anything. That's the supreme immorality. But I do think it is wrong to get stoned out of your mind on anything. It's degrading. God gave us minds to see things clearly, not to befuddle and bemuse. But the moral arguments, and there are greater moral arguments too, the traditional one is that it undermines one's self-control and therefore leads to other more serious wrongdoing. And for all those reasons, I'm against using it. I would discourage people from using it. But because those who actually are motivated by a moral disapproval of abuse of drugs make two mistakes. One, they say they confuse use and abuse. Occasional having a relaxing spiff. I never have, and I wouldn't advocate it, but I do occasionally go home and have a glass of wine to relax after a hard day looking at 38 degrees petitions. And I don't see any great difficulty in that, but I would discourage people from abusing either alcohol or cannabis. They confuse use and abuse, and they jump to the conclusion that because something is morally wrong, it should be against the law. Lots of things are morally wrong, which are not against the law. It's against adultery is wrong, I think. One shouldn't betray one's spouse, but we shouldn't put people in jail if they do. And we've got to get used to the idea that in a free country there will be lots of moral decisions that people will have to make themselves without being told by the law what to do. And actually we'd be a healthier and better country if we actually gave people that moral responsibility without saying that it's something we approve of. It's a choice they should make, and those of us who disapprove of it should make the moral arguments against it and not dress them up or hide behind largely spurious and bogus health concerns, which at very best are greatly exaggerated and at worst are non-existent.
Just a very brief intervention to say that was just the most perfect explanation of liberalism, and I applaud the right honourable gentleman for giving it.
Well, just to make it a genuine invention, because I had finished, I'll say actually that there is quite an overlap between conservatism and liberalism, and if he'd abandon the wrong bits and keep the right bits, he could join a larger party.
Paul Monaghan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the opportunity to contribute to this very important debate, and congratulations to the honourable member for winning this debate. A debate about the regulation of cannabis to reduce harm is, I think, very welcome. I will immediately declare an interest. For many years, I've had the privilege of holding the position of director of the Inverness MS Centre. Multiple sclerosis is, of course, a disease for which cannabis has brought relief to some people, and I'm anxious to support those individuals. I'll also declare an interest as the Vice Chair of the All-Party Parliamentary Group on Drug Policy Reform. This widely respected group has undertaken significant research into the medical and social use of cannabis, and the findings are, I think, unassailable. There are very strong arguments to support the regulation of cannabis for social use. But I will focus today on the issue of medical use of cannabis. Indeed, Mr. Chairman, I would urge all honourable and right honourable members to consider the legalisation of cannabis for medical use as a matter for their urgent consideration. Currently, the many applications of cannabis as a medicine are impeded by its inclusion within Schedule 1 of the Misuse of Drugs Act. Schedule 1 drugs are, of course, controlled substances considered to have no medicinal value. A simple change to Schedule 2 would recognise the drug's undoubted medicinal value and place it on a par with opiates. It would also enable research into the vast potential for a range of medical applications and facilitate relief for thousands of people who, like many suffering from MS and epilepsy, are not helped by other medicines. Cannabis is already an important medicine. The utility of cannabis and its derivatives has been established through analysis of the treatment of a range of conditions, including multiple sclerosis, epilepsy, numerous forms of chronic pain, glaucoma, nausea and loss of appetite caused by chemotherapy and radiotherapy. Estimates suggest that some 30,000 people across the UK are at risk, unfortunately, of breaking the law by using cannabis medicinally. But they do so primarily because it provides relief from chronic medical conditions and provides relatively mild side effects. There are already a number of existing anomalies within the current UK system. Savatex, which is a synthetic form of two of the main cannabinoids in cannabis, that is THC and CBD, and is authorised in the UK as an extra treatment for patients with spasticity due to multiple sclerosis. Sativex contains the same constituents as drugs classified in Schedule 1 as cannabis derivatives. Sativex can cost over 10 times that of medicinal cannabis imported from Holland. Schedule 1 status for cannabis makes research into medical applications an expensive obstacle. It involves a minimum outlay of around £5,000 to cover licensing and security. Licence applications take about a year. In the UK, only 4 hospitals have been granted a licence to hold stocks of cannabis, although all of them are able to hold heroin. Research into cannabis has been calculated as costing 10 times as much and taking significantly longer than research into all other forms of drug. It's also worth noting that the recent Home Office report, Drugs International Comparators, suggests that the severity of the cannabis drug control regime has had little impact on the prevalence of drug use. An adjustment to the current UK control regime to give patients the right to medication that they believe works for them is unlikely to have any wider impact on the level of recreational cannabis use. Indeed, I would argue that no sensible argument can be mounted that medicinal regulation would impact adversely on other forms of illegal drug use. The case for the regulation of cannabis for social use is primarily about ending criminalisation, reducing harm, and creating separate drugs markets. Laudable as these arguments are, they are only tangentially related to the regulation of cannabis for medicinal use. This fact is evidenced in the drugs regulation for use in many parts of the world. Over 20 states within the USA have provision for the supply of medicinal cannabis. In Europe, medicinal cannabis is produced in the Netherlands and is available on application by a physician in the following European countries: Italy, Finland, Switzerland and Germany, and most recently in Canada. We must be clear, Mr. Chairman, that cannabis does have a legitimate medical use that is not recognised by its Schedule 1 classification. Cannabis is in fact an important medicine with a legitimate role in the treatment of conditions, including, as I've said, the symptoms of multiple sclerosis, epilepsy, various forms of chronic pain, and a host of other conditions. There is also mounting evidence to support its use as an effective treatment for Dravet syndrome, which is an extreme form of childhood epilepsy, where sufferers have up to 100 seizures each day. Some families have reported that CBD is the only thing that has been effective in easing symptoms for their child. Further research into this and the ability to access medicinal cannabis legally would be life-changing for sufferers of this condition. It is enormously important that we're able to research the further potential medicinal use of cannabis. And to do that, we need to change it from a Schedule 1 drug to Schedule 2, and to do that soon. By changing cannabis from a Schedule 1 to a Schedule 2 drug, people could be prescribed medicinal cannabis by a physician when appropriate. Patients who find the drug helpful for their condition would no longer need to break the law to obtain it, and would have access to high-quality cannabis with monitored cannabinoid content. It would greatly facilitate important research into the medical uses of cannabis. Mr. Chairman, I hope the Minister will consider regulating cannabis for medicinal use. Quite frankly, our constituents deserve nothing less.
Dr. Daniel Poulter.
Evans, it's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship and a pleasure to speak in a debate, and I'd like to commend the Honourable Member for Newport East for bringing the debate today and having, I think, a grown-up, sensible discussion about a topic that's often taboo and shouldn't be, because it's something that does affect the lives of many of our constituents. A number of issues have been covered
today, including the criminal justice system, which is an issue that I'm going to come back to later on. Indeed, the medicinal uses of cannabis, something that I will pick up on a couple of the points made by the previous speaker and made very articulately. And there are some issues, I believe, with the current law that do need to be looked at, that perhaps make the medicinal use and the research of the medicinal use of cannabis more challenging. But I also wanted to touch upon some of the medical evidence in this debate, and there were some compelling points made by my right honourable friend, the member for Hitchin and Harpenden earlier, and he made a very eloquent speech for the legalisation of cannabis. I'm not, unfortunately, going to be able to fully support him in my remarks today, and I hope that my discussion of some of the medical background to that will be helpful in explaining why. Now, we know that, and many of my remarks, Mr. Evans, I've picked from a balanced review by the Royal College of Psychiatrists, who perhaps I would hope we would all consider to be a very well-resourced and a very appropriate source of material for balancing the medical evidence of the use of cannabis and looking not just at medical but also physical health. And most of my remarks will be based upon the evidence that they have collated. The College does not have a view on the legal position, but does nonetheless want people to look at the evidence and make up their own minds. And I will give you my view, having reviewed some of that evidence. Now, even though there's been a steady reduction in the use of cannabis since 1996, about 2.3 million of 16 to 59-year-olds have reported using cannabis in the past year. And frequent use of cannabis is over twice as likely amongst young people. In spite of many government and media warnings about the health risks, many people see cannabis as a harmless substance that helps you to relax and chill, a drug that, unlike alcohol and cigarettes, might even be good for your physical and mental health. And that's something I'm going to come on and say is clearly not the case. It's also worth looking and quoting directly from the Royal College of Psychiatrists about some of how cannabis and cannabis plants have evolved over the past few years. As my right honourable friend said that drug use is very different since when he was at university. That may well be the case, but certainly the evolution of cannabis and the increasing frequency of high-potency cannabis, or skunk as it's often referred to, which refers in general to a number of types of stronger cannabis, has something that's changed some of the health risks that are associated with cannabis use. Now, as the Royal College says, over the last 15 years, skunk has invaded the street market, and its THC content is about 2 to 3 times higher than that of traditional cannabis used in earlier years. Now, I'm going to come on to THC content and different aspects and the chemical components of cannabis a little bit later on. But in the UK, most sold materials in cannabis is actually homegrown due to a loophole in the law making it legal to buy seeds over the internet. So I think I do have some sympathy with the issues and the points that were raised by my right honourable friend, the member for Hitchin and Harpenden. Actually, the law at the moment, there are some challenges in the law, and de facto we do have effectively decriminalisation of cannabis in many areas of the country, and I'd be interested to hear the Minister's views on how he sees that, and how he sees a clear distinction perhaps from enabling a drug which we know to be harmful through its legal sale, through legalisation and all the other things that go with that, as opposed to a more decriminalising approach and police discretion that we have at the moment. And I believe the approach that we have at the moment is probably the right one, given some of the harmful effects that I'm going to come on to and to talk about. Of